Hello everyone, Equestria here. I know you guys haven't heard from me in a while, and I'm sorry that I took a long hiatus from Chapter 4, even though I said I was coming back, but here we go. Chapter 4, Misconceptions. There are no zombie ponies. Pain. I thought I experienced pain after the Cloudsdale Megaspell backwash and my Skywagon crash. I was wrong. I had never been shot before, and I had not expected it to hurt as much as it had. Figures that the first time it happens would be with the biggest rifle I had seen. I imagine the inequine wail of pain I made could be heard from Manhattan to Camelot. It was cut short by May grabbing me jarringly to force a healing potion down my throat. We only had a mouthful of healing potions, but May reached into her packs and pulled another one out. She didn't bother trying to reactivate her radiation ward, more concerned about the gaping hole in my leg. Before she could administer it, though, she stopped short. Looking at the hole punched by a powerful shot, I was being knit together by the magic of the potion abnormally quickly. As well, there seemed to be a faint green glow coming from the wound. Despite the apparent rapidity of the wound's regeneration, May still made me drink an additional healing potion. I had no objections, although the pain had subsided before I finished drinking the second potion. I was glad for it, though. I did not envy any pony who got shot through the leg without one available, especially if they were going to get shot at more. "What the hell are they doing?" I panted. I tried to stand, but my shot leg was wobbly and gave out from under me. Taking a glance at it, I saw the flesh around the wound was stained darkly with my blood. At least I still bled like a normal pony. "I don't know," answered May, looking more than a little bit aggravated. We walk up to the tower nice and peaceful, and the first response is to shoot at us? "I'm just glad I spotted them," I muttered, again trying and failing to stand. That shot was probably lined up for one of our heads. Considering mine was glowing, it was probably made for a better target. May had still not reactivated her radiation ward, presumably not wanting to lead the sniper to us. As oddly as it seemed, the lack of radiation ward seemed to have no real effect on us, although the radiation detector on May's pitbuck was practically screaming at us. I felt no different. Perhaps being irradiated before had granted us some kind of resilience. I wasn't complaining, yet, but I also didn't want to be proven fatally wrong. "Now what do we do?" I asked hurriedly. Whatever it was we were going to do, I wanted to do it before the intense radiation here made our condition any worse, if that were possible. "Well," pondered May, "they're not shooting at us anymore, so it's possible we just spooked them. That's 'cause we shouldn't try talking to them. I didn't come all this way just to get turned away by a superstitious sniper." "How do you plan on talking to them, though?" I asked. "I might have been able to fly up to the balcony for a chat, but wouldn't get close if they took another shot." Before I could mention it to May, her horn lit up as she cleared her throat. She then belted out a call to the other ponies on the balcony in a magically amplified voice. "Ministry of Arcane Science Security ponies, this is Mayflower Cure, Ministry of Peace Spell Research and Medic, requesting that you hold your fire. Authorization Sparkle Alpha 227. My ears were ringing for a few moments after May's outburst. I wouldn't be surprised if every pony in the tower heard that. I was somewhat reminiscent of Princess Luna's royal Canterlot voice, as demonstrated on Nightmare more than 30 years prior. I smiled, remembering that night fondly. However, this was not the time or place for nostalgia. There was a long pause, with both May and I holding our breath. "Come out, where we could see you!" The voice came from the tower. It was loud enough to hear at this range, but quite unlikely May's magically amplified shout. "Slowly." I gave May a weak smile. I was glad that she had managed to say something convincing, but I still didn't like the circumstances we were under. Even if we approached cautiously, the ponies on the balcony still had a powerful rifle, and there was really nothing preventing them from taking another shot. They had completely ignored the reasonable caution part of the turntables report, even if we did look like zombies. May seemed to share my concerns. but she was determined to get into the tower before moving out from behind the tripped-over cart. May's horn lit up again, and we were enveloped in a hemispherical barrier. This one was a sickly green color of a shield instead of the rosy radiation ward. It also served to keep some of the radiation away from us, but not much. Slowly, May and I walked out from behind the cart. My gait was still hobbled by the shot to my leg, so I leaned into May for support. I could have used my wing to take the weight off of it, but I imagined the sudden flapping might spook the ponies on the balcony into a sudden shooting. As we moved into the view of the balcony, I forced my eyes to focus on the two ponies up there. They kept the rifle trained on us. But thankfully they were not shooting. Yet, we continued until standing on top of the fallen brass letters. May turned her gaze towards the hazmat ponies, dropping the shield around us. Once again, she magically projected her voice. "Ponies of the Ministry of Arcane Science, we come bearing news and aid. We seek an audience with turntable and a chance to rest." The two ponies looked at each other, presumably talking to each other about May's declaration. Then one of them, pointing the rifle at us, levitated a megaphone in front of the mouthpiece of his radiation suit. "You can go right on back where you came from. We're not about to let a pair of zombies in here. Now get lost before my buddy gets shooty again." "I'm afraid you have some serious misconceptions about my friend and I," insisted May, her magically amplified voice dwarfing the simple megaphone. "We're not zombies. The affliction we suffer is a result from intense magical radiation exposure. And we are not going to eat your brains. The very notion is ridiculous. Mutants, zombies, ghouls, revenants, I don't care what you call yourselves," declared the pony with the megaphone. "You're not getting in here. We have enough problem as it is, without a pair of monstrosities mucking about the place." "We are not monsters either," roared May, her tone losing its formal civility. "We have come here to help." The balcony pony snickered decisively. "You want to help? That's rich." The megaphone wielder exchanged glances with the sniper, then turned back on us. "Fine, then here's how you help. We've got plenty of water in here thanks to a couple talismans, but our food and medicine reserves are nearly depleted. You bring us some food and medicine, then maybe we'll talk." Without waiting for further response, the pony wielding the rifle took a warning shot at us. It impacted the ground a few inches from us, throwing a puff of ash in the air. May and I both gagged on the ash, making the roughness in our throats even worse. We trotted away from the tower, but Sniper got an idea to take another more accurate shot. "Can you believe them?" fumed May. The two of us had put the MAS tower behind us half an hour ago, and she was still angry about their treatment. "We're the first living ponies they've seen from the outside of the tower, and they won't even listen to us." While I had not been expecting the warmest reception at the tower, the fact that I got shot notwithstanding, that would have turned us away entirely was insulting. I would have been satisfied just to give them our news regarding Canterlot and leave, but they hadn't even let us do that. As well as the task as they set forth was a fool's errand. Any food in the city would have been vaporized as readily as any living creature. However, "Actually, yes," I said, answering May's question. She stopped and looked at me quizzically. I pointed to my lazy eye, which rolled down as if on cue. "I'm no stranger to being judged by my appearance." "This is totally different," protested May. "The Mexico Holocaust was 9 days ago. This is no time for that kind of discrimination. If they didn't have a rifle pointed at us, I'd pull them down from the balcony for a stern lecture." I shook my head. "Ponies like that are always the same. It doesn't matter what's going on around them. They'll always find a way to make themselves feel better compared to others. Fluttershy taught me that. The only way to deal with ponies like that is to not listen to them." May suddenly stopped trotting and fell to her haunches. She turned and looked to me like she'd seen a ghost. "You knew Fluttershy?" I stopped as well, looking back to May. "Was it really so shocking?" "Yes," I replied, not sure how else to respond. "I've actually met all of the ministry mayors back when they lived in Ponyville. I had never really given it too much thought before the war. They all had pretty normal lives." May managed to look amazed. "I ran into Fluttershy a few times, but she was always too busy or timid to converse with." I also remember seeing her when she was in our modeling tour long before the awful war even started. I remember that, I remarked. That was around the time when Sparkle Cola first hit the market. I bet it would have done half as well without her face slapped on it. May chuckled, then smiled at me. Can you tell me anything else about Fluttershy? Or any of them, for that matter? I pressed my hoof to my chin. I don't really have much to tell, or at least not on a personal level. I was never really in their close circles. I just delivered the mail. The time I mentioned Fluttershy was actually a bit of a fluke. Apparently, she had just been looking for opportunities to practice being assertive and try to tell a couple of bullies for making fun of my eye. It didn't work that well, so we just left them, and I had a brief chat. May let a snorting laugh in that. Fluttershy? Assertive? That's like saying Twilight Sparkle was tardy with something. I smirked at May knowingly. I then proceeded to tell her the Miss Smarty Pants incident, wherein I ended up grappling with the former mayor of Ponyville over an enchanted rag doll because Twilight Sparkle was late sending a friendship report to Princess Celestia. By the time I finished, May was rolling on the ash-strewn street in laughter. The laughter was tainted, without the same hoarse tinge, but was of a nicer sound of any I'd heard when the megaspell went off. I couldn't help but join in. "Oh, Celestia's mercy!" cried May, wiping a tear from her eye. She finally had stopped laughing after a good minute. "I don't suppose you got more stories like that?" "A few," I replied. "However, there was more pressing I wanted to address before I told any more tales from Ponyville. Before that, though, what are we going to do about the MAS hub?" "We're going to help them, of course," replied May curdlingly. "Regardless of their poor attitudes, those two said they were low on food and medicine, right? Right now, the MAS-EBS is one of the most important things left standing in Equestria. If they all starve to death, every pony who's left loses." "Okay, I can appreciate that. But that still leaves the problem of where we're going to get the food and medicine. I knew I was starting to state the obvious, but I hoped that doing so would prompt May to actually tell me what she had planned. She often neglected to do so. "Manhattan General Hospital," stated May solemnly. "It's the Manhattan hub for the Ministry of Peace before the blast. It was where I worked. I don't even know if it's still standing, but it's our best bet for medicine. If we're lucky, which we seem to be, there might be some food, too." "Is there any chance there are survivors there?" "It was a ministry hub, after all, just like the MAS building. Perhaps it had magical defense of its own." May shook her head. "Doubt it. The hospital was a lot closer to the city center. Even if we did have defenses, they would have been nearly as effective." May and I took wandering through the ruins of Manhattan at a moderate pace. A large part of that was so May can get more stories of the ministry mayors out of me. I didn't mind sharing, although it made me a bit sick to my stomach to recall the baked bads incident. I still wanted a fresh, untainted muffin. May grimaced at the one as well, having a parent suffering from food poisoning once when she was younger. In between my stories, May would switch the radio in her pit bug to see if Turntable had any more news. I personally wondered if he might have overheard May's magical shouting and might have had a different opinion of our attempts to help. This time we tuned in. We were met with the tail end of a song by Sapphire Shores. It was an old favorite of mine, and again seemed strangely appropriate. "That was Sapphire Shores, the sun can't hide forever." Apparently, our cloud-walking kin haven't got the message about that. Can't really blame them that much. It's an awful mess down here. I stopped listening intently. I hadn't heard much about the other Pegasus ponies after the megaspell went off. Raider had theorized about them, wanting out the radiation behind the cloud ceiling, but I wonder if Turntable found it something more specific. Unfortunately, he hadn't, and continued his broadcast. Speaking of sunshine, though, I've got a ray of hope for any pony out there listening. A message came through earlier today from Stable Tech. Despite the loss of the National Communication Network, this little engineer apparently rigged up a direct transmission terminal from a small town of Ponyville. The quality of the message degraded a bit, but the message is still clear. May and I glanced at each other, hoping. Gizmo pulled through. Turntable played the recorded message through it. It sounded like Gizmo was trying to speak over radio static at maximum volume. Okay, I think it's working now. This is Stable Tech Junior Engineer Gizmo. It took a while, but I managed to pull some of the data out of the Stable Tech network. The Omega level threat protocols were transmitted successfully and received at least 86% of the finished stables. As well as I can confirm that Stable 1, 2, 8, 12, 15, 21, 24, 22, 32 through 37, 63, 78, 89 through 91, 99, and 101 have all been filled and sealed. I'll see if I can salvage any more data. That's all I've got. Oh, and if... Gizmo's voice had died with a loud burst of static. Apparently, he hadn't been able to maintain the transmission link. Still, the fact that he managed to get through at all was a blessing. Even better, Stable 29 had been on the list of successfully sealed stables. May looked more relieved than I'd seen her. However, Turntable picked up the broadcast again a moment later. Wish I could have heard that last bit before the link died, but this is the best news I've gotten since it took up post. Not only did Stable Tech get the word out, but we have confirmation that they managed to save quite a few ponies. If any pony out there has family slated for a spot in the stable, take comfort in this news. Better still, this info comes as spot my personal appreciation. Stable 29 had a spot reserved for my Auntie Scratch. That's right, fillies and gentle colts, DJ Pony lives. To that little Stable Tech engineer, I give my deepest gratitude. It looks like there may be some hope for us after all. Thanks, little guy. This next song goes out to you. The song that followed was one of the most upbeat songs in Turntable selection. It was sung by Pinkie Pie herself. The song is bringing smiles, turning troubled times. Seeming more fitting now than any other time I've heard in the past few days. Even though May and I were standing in the middle of the blast-torn ruins of Manhattan, surrounded by ash and countless dead ponies, everything seemed just a little bit better. We were both disappointed when the song ended, but we were pressed on to Manhattan General Hospital. Gizmo had done his part, and now it was time to do ours. I hoped that we'd be able to find what ponies the MAS hub needed for the sake of Turntable and the others that managed to survive there, even those two jerk guards. We continued walking towards the hospital as Turntable played a few more songs. I kind of hoped he'd eventually be able to expand his selection, although he wouldn't get the opportunity unless May and I found some supplies. It turned out rather to be fortunate that May and I could withstand the radiation exposure. Otherwise, they might all starve to death, although even if we weren't strangely resilient, May still would have found a way to help them. I was distracted from my musing by a soft glow of light that my lazy eye caught off to the side. Turning my good eye towards the light, I saw a Sparkle Cola vending machine, or at least most of the Sparkle Cola vending machine. The front of the machine had been torn off by the megaspell blasts, and half of the machine was facing the center of the city and had warped and melted, despite the 2 lines of soda bottles that remained intact inside. I wandered over to the machine, somewhat marveled by the fact that it was still even mostly intact. I thought for the moment the light I saw in the machine itself, but it was actually coming from the sodas. While one row of bottles were regular carrot-flavored cola, the other were Sparkle Cola Rad flavor. It's like a bug in the face with radishes, which left a soft, rosy glow. The crash of my old delivery wagon had cost me the opportunity to try the new beverage, and it sounded like it would be tasty. I plucked 2 bottles from the machine and turned back towards May. She smirked at me and levitated one of the bottles over to her. The glowing of her magic almost perfectly matched the glowing of the bottle's radiation. You know, the radiation in these things obviously is not healthy. Don't know where they got the idea to put it in from. I don't think we really need to worry about that, I nickered. Considering the circumstances, I imagine the regular Sparkle Cola would have been just as irradiated as rad. As well as the radiation didn't seem to harm our mutated bodies any further, as it already had. I braced the top of the bottle with my teeth, and I used my tongue to flip the cap off. I let out a small yelp as the metal cap nicked my tongue, nearly causing me to drop the bottle. I set the bottle down and spat out the cap. Damn thing could have been used for shrapnel. May nickered at me and pointed to the machine. A bottle opener was attached intact to the side. I face-hoofed. Ignoring May's sniggered, I picked up the bottle once again with my teeth and tilted my head back to take a swig. I sputtered a little, having gulped a bit too much. Even so, it was really good. The soda was warm, although I had expected that. But the radish flavor was still strong, as well as, whoa. It really was like a buck to the face. All of a sudden, I felt rather invigorated, more energetic than I had since we left Ponyville. I swiftly downed the rest of the soda, then looked over to May, who was nursing hers much more slowly. I'll admit it, she said between sips. It's got quite a kick to it. I'm just not that fond of radishes. What I was about to say was cut off by a loud belch. Perhaps I shouldn't have drank the soda too quickly. How uncouth, nickered May sarcastically. I chuckled, a bit embarrassed. I drank it too fast. Duh. Indeed, May's horn lit up as she floated a few bottles of the regular Sparkle Cola over to her. She handed the rad off to me, and I opened a regular one for herself. She placed a couple more bottles into her saddlebag as well. I polished off the soda that May had half finished before grabbing a few more from the machine and slipping them into my bag. Even though the food and drink seemed to have less of an impact than they used to, I still planned to enjoy the little things when I could. I figured I would be riding the buzz of the soda for a good while. Just as May and I were about to get underway again, the air was split by an ear-rending shriek. Before I could figure out where it had come from, a streak of green and gold shot past us. May and I looked on in awe as a massive bird, regal and majestic, stepped in front of us. It stared down at the two of us, perhaps sizing us up. Licks of sickly green fire fell from its beak, and massive aura of radiation, at least 10 times its own, surrounded it. I was awestruck for a few moments before realizing how odd this was. Every living thing in the city, aside from the protection of the MAS tower, should have been incinerated. Had this bird flown in after the blast? Or did someone manage to magically survive? The latter, strange as it sounded, seemed to be suggested that the magical radiation bleeding from off the creature. Well, I'll be, I heard May mutter from next to me. She tried to let out an impressed whistle, but her decayed lips made it impossible. A phoenix? That was a phoenix? I'd seen one before when Princess Celestia brought her pet to a party to Ponyville. However, her phoenix had been magnificently scarlet and gold. At least after she rejuvenated herself, not the sickly green and pale gold that this creature displayed. It also had been radioactive enough to cause May's pitbuck to emit a constant wail, with no gap between clicks. Could it have been twisted by magical radiation like May and I had been? May seemed to be fascinated by the mutant phoenix. She took a single step forward and began to speak to it. Hello there. Before she could finish, the massive bird let out another ear-splitting screech and dove towards us, beak open, licked with the flame. I shoved May out of its path, crashing into the Sparkle Cola machine as it passed over us. We had it been moments before, it would have spewed a wide stream of putrid green flame. It was the same color as the green flames that still burned around the city. The heat from the fire made me wince, but thankfully neither of us had been hit directly. The sickly phoenix swooped around us after it passed, heading back towards us, shrieking angrily. Run! I shouted, trying to get my own hooves to start moving. Thankfully, May didn't hesitate to take my advice. We bolted away the building just as the irradiated phoenix blasted the fire at us again. The half-demolished vending machine glowed bright green, before melting into a puddle of molten metal and glass. A hiss of steam came off the puddle as the remaining Sparkle Cola evaporated. As well as being a large, breathing fire, the bird was fast. It caught up to us quickly, and we had to take a sharp turn down a side street to avoid getting roasted. I don't understand, shouted May as we ran down the street. Phoenixes aren't supposed to be this aggressive. May, we stumbled into its territory, I called. I glanced back over my shoulders, seeing as it was following us after taking a loop around to follow the side street. Phoenixes aren't territorial either, countered May. Even if they were, we're miles away from the Manhattan Gardens. They do tend to be loyal, though. Does that really matter right now? As intriguing as this bird might have been to some pony like May, I'm more immediately concerned about the fact that it was trying to barbecue us. I really hoped it hadn't mistaken us for carrion meat. We dove across the street into another wave of flame blasted closer to us than I would have liked. This time, the rush of flame struck a few exposed steel beams on the corner of a building, the heat warping them. The entire corner of the building gave a metallic squeal as the girders bent, shifting the superstructure above them dangerously. Despite the speed and power of the creature, it was providing us with small openings. It slowed itself down when it breathed fire, usually just enough for May and I to get out of the way. Not always, though, as it next passed by the creature, splashed flame onto my flank, eliciting a painful yelp from me. That same blast singed off most of the strands of hair that had been stubbornly clinging to May's tail. Despite our ability to evade the bird, for the most part, we were still pretty screwed. I was glad for the extra energy I'd gotten from the Spark-a-Cola rad. Otherwise, we'd have gotten torched by now. But we still had no way to defend ourselves against it. I imagined that Gizmo's gun, augmented though it was, wouldn't do a whole lot of damage to it. That was assuming that the bullets didn't just melt from the heat and radiation it was giving off. If May and I were going to get away from this alive, we would need to lose the Phoenix. That was going to be damn near impossible with how fast it was. Briefly considering luring it away, but it was likely that results in getting torched. As well as there would be nothing stopping it from coming back for May. Even if it worked, May would never let me hear the end of it if I managed to come back at all. May had her own idea. She magically removed that gun from its holster, then dashed back into the street. She fired 2 shots in the direction of the Firebird, but they either missed or had no real impact. The noise from the gun seemed to at least startle the creature, making it stop midair briefly. Taking advantage of the opening, May and I dashed back up the street. As we passed under the bird, May fired 3 more shots, it fluttering back through the air, giving us a chance to pull ahead. Our lead didn't last long. It soon realized we weren't shooting anymore. It charged at us once again, May slipping the gun away, not having the time to reload as we ran. We just reached the corner of the main street when another blast of fire flared out from behind us. In a flash of desperate inspiration, I shoved May back onto the main street. The bird's wash of flame struck the already warped metal beams of the building we had passed before, which glowed brightly as they heated further. There was a horrific squeal of abused metal as the weakened beams started to buckle under the weight of the building they supported. As the building began to tip, the beams had not been melted, groaned, and bent from the added pressure. The building seemed to collapse a lot more slowly than I anticipated. Rending metal, collapsing timbers, crumbling plaster, and shattering glass blended into the cacophony of the destruction. Much like the gunfire before, the awful noise spooked the mutant phoenix. It fluttered in confusion, backpedaling through the air from the falling structure. I wanted to let up a whoop and decided that getting crushed was not a risk I was willing to take in our account. Sadly, my revelry was cut short, as I realized that the building was going to crush May, and surely it would have the phoenix. We had little room to avoid the collapse in the narrow street, and the building was coming down faster and faster as more of its supports at the base were torn loose. Worse, the building was twisting as it fell. Almost wanted to retaliate against me for bringing about this demise. Before I could run any further, May grasped me in her magic and pulled me close to her. She glanced up at the collapsed building, shoving me over a few feet. She then threw up her magical shield around us, her horn glowing brightly. A layer of overglow formed as the shield's thickness and brightness increased. May groaned with the strain of holding the shield as the building landed on us. May had shoved us into the path of one of the building's windows and scorched the wooden frame of which splintering against her shield. A number of shards of glass shattered around the edges. A few chairs and desks fell from the floor of the building, crashing against our protection and breaking apart. A blown-out terminal struck the shield, bouncing in almost comically down the side. The rain of debris continued for several heart-pounding seconds. May maintained her barrier spell for a full minute, allowing any remaining debris from the building to fall to the ground. The building darkened for a bit when she dropped the shield, and it glowing for almost much light as the sunlight penetrated from the far side of the building, now facing skyward. May was panting roughly, but at least we had survived. May turned on me, jabbing a hoof into my breast. "Don't you ever do that again!" She prodded her hoof into my chest, with each word with emphasis. I wasn't about to object. Reluctantly, May allowed me to fly her up through the collapsed building in order to get free of it. It was a tricky flight with my wings in such poor shape, but I managed to pull it off. When we emerged, the sickly phoenix was nowhere to be seen. I was thankful, since it meant I wouldn't need to bring down any more buildings. May and I walked along the upturned side of the building until we reached the edge, jumping back down onto the street. Now that I was no longer a threat, I found myself more curious about the irradiated phoenix that had attacked us. Where do you think it came from? I asked. May seemed to be thinking about it as well. But she also had some prior knowledge. The Manhattan Garden, she answered, was certainly. A large number of exotic and rare creatures were housed there, including a few phoenixes. Wouldn't they have been killed by the megaspell? Everything else had been. Yes, but remember, phoenixes have their own exceptional properties. I did remember that, as Celestia's pet burst into flames and then reformed from the ashes. Either their own rebirth process or external sources, fire wouldn't keep a phoenix down. That made a certain amount of sense. Balefire was still fire, sort of. Okay, but what about the rest of it? Fire breathing, radiation field, and aggression are all not in the book of tricks. May shrugged. She didn't seem to have any answers on the front. My best guess is that the combination of balefire and magical radiation twisted the phoenix while it was still a pile of ash. Or it could have gotten its ashes mixed up with something else during the rebirth process. It might have been interesting to study it if I had the chance. I found myself feeling rather disappointed at May's statement. It was bad enough that the megaspell had killed so many ponies. Now their after effects were twisting up everything that was left standing. I was even more glad about Gizmo's revelation that the stables had been successfully sealed, even if he had not yet confirmed all of them. At least some pony would be able to live their lives away from this horror. In the meantime, it was up to those left on the surface to look out for each other, even if not every pony was willing to play nice. The rest of our trip was mercifully uneventful, and we arrived at Manhattan General late in the afternoon. Unfortunately, there wasn't much left of it. While the building appeared to have survived the blast intact, a skyscraper across the street had not been so fortunate. The tower had fallen directly on top of the MOP hub, crushing half the building underneath it. From there, the former hospital had collapsed in on itself, the fourth floor upwards, and the levels pulverized by the wreckage of the fallen building. That left us with half of the lower 3 floors to scavenge for supplies, less than a fifth of the building. Mercifully, the remnants of the building were sturdy enough to remain standing. It didn't look like any danger of further collapse. I had more than enough experience with demolition for the day. The main entrance had the hospital collapsed, forcing May and I to enter through the building through an adjacent window. Surprisingly, the pane of glass was still mostly intact, though the covered with spiderweb cracks. May had levitated a chunk of debris, using it to break the glass and let us through. The interior of the hospital was surprisingly well preserved. From what I could see, however, the interior was dim. The lights have all been burnt out, shattered, or died from lack of power. May's horn ignited with magical light, bringing the hospital's interior into focus. We let out a joint scream of what we saw. The former Ministry of Peace hub was filled with corpses. Directly in front of us were 2 charred unicorn bodies, equally burnt pink, and a yellow uniform dress. Only a few feet away from us, an earth pony patient sat dead, in a half-melted wheelchair. She was a gruesome sight, as her eyes burst right out of their socket. Apparently, there had been defenses around the building, although they only had served to make death of the ponies inside more horrid. For the first time in a while, the smell of death reached my nose. Although, our travels, I had grown to the use of the smell of my own rotten flesh, but the scent of so much of it contained in one place, much of it burnt, struck me hard. The scent of medicine and disinfectant mix in it didn't help. I turned to one of the spots and stuck my head out where the glassless window was and vomited onto the ashen pavement. The sparkle Colorado was much worse coming up than it had been going down. May had managed to stay a little more composed than I did, which was just meant that she was able to hold off vomiting herself until I was finished. When she was through, she returned to the 2 dead nurses in front of us. She pecked at their dresses with the hoof, turning over their name tags. One of them was too scorched to read. The other one had Buttercup printed on it. May slumped over on her haunches. Some pony she knew, I presumed. It's kind of funny, May said, a few tears escaping from her eye. The day before the blast, I was scheduled for an overnight shift. I asked Buttercup to cover for me because I had a migraine and I was going to take her shift the following morning. I had been on my way into the city when the megaspell went off. I marveled at that. It seemed like me. Her reason for being on the edge of the megaspell blast was so much of a fluke as my own had been. Much like the Pegasus behind me that burned to death, some pony had been killed in May's place. Was it a coincidence? Or had we been specifically selected for this curse of bearing witness to the destruction of Equestria? Should we bury her? I asked, sensing that this friend had been close one. Very close, I would later learn. May stood back up and shook her head. Let's go. We've got ponies that are still alive to consider. If we stop to see every pony that's already dead, we'd be at it forever. I nodded, but my heart went out to May. At least the ponies elsewhere in the city had been cremated, and not just left to rot where they fell. Where should we start? As luck would have it, May deliberately looked away from Buttercup's corpse, my office and lab on the 3rd floor. I kept a few supplies in there, and my master key should be there too. Once we have that, we'll be able to open up every medical box left in the building, assuming that all of them are locked. Once we've got the meds, we can see if there's any edible left in the cafeteria. Each floor has a safe as well, although those are mainly to keep hard copies of the patient's records. That was Chapter 4, Part 1. Stay tuned for the next chapter.